Look what they need to do to mimic a fraction of our power. Nolan Grayson, the deuteragonist of Invincible and main antagonist of Season 1, is a Viltrumite, better known as the superhero Omni-Man. He's the father of Oliver Grayson and Mark Grayson and the estranged husband of Debbie Grayson. And boy, does he have a story to tell. Welcome to the Amagi. In today's video, we're going over the life of Nolan Grayson, aka Omni-Man. Only 25% of our viewers are subscribed to our channel, so if you're a fan, make sure you like the video and double check that you are indeed subscribed. Alright, on with the show. Background. Born on a distant planet, Viltrum, to an imperialistic race of super beings known as the Viltrumites, Nolan was indoctrinated with the Viltrumite creed of conquering as much of the galaxy as possible to assimilate other worlds, species, and civilizations into their empire. Nolan joined the Viltrumite military forces as a young man and rapidly rose through their ranks through years of successful war and conquest. Eventually, the size of their ever-growing empire and their forces being spread thin prompted the Viltrumites to look for more efficient methods of galactic domination. To counter the raw manpower needed for a full-scale invasion into target planets, it was instead decided that the most trusted officers of the Viltrumite military would be assigned planets to weaken sufficiently in order to allow for a seamless takeover. Nolan was assigned Earth, and as such, traveled there and created a new life on the planet, adopting the moniker Omni-Man and aligning himself with the original Guardians of the Globe and Global Defense Agency. Nolan also married a human woman named Debbie and had his son Mark. After a falling out with Mark, he lives on Thraxia with a new outfit and a new persona called the Monarch, portrayed as a messiah-like king to the Thraxians. Nolan's early life. Nolan was born on Viltrum, a planet of very powerful aliens who were supremacists and planet conquerors. His parents died when he was young. When he was old enough, he joined the war effort, but after a while, the Viltrumite race changed their tactics. They needed a more efficient way to conquer worlds, so they assigned their most trusted officers to a planet, each to weaken on their own. Nolan was one of those few and got assigned to Earth. When he came to Earth, he took up the name Nolan Grayson and took a job as a writer. Privately, he presented himself as a superhero to hide his true persona and began to work very closely with a well-respected superhero team, the Guardians of the Globe. Nolan was asked many times to become an official member of the Guardians of the Globe, but he refused each time and was considered as reserved. Over time, he became known as the hero Omni-Man. Nolan's life on Earth. Eventually, Nolan married Debbie Grayson after he saved her while on hero duty, and she became aware of his identity. They also had a human/Viltrumite son who they named Mark. One day, Nolan told a young Mark a false story that he was part of a world betterment committee and had left Viltrum in order to help Earth. At some point, Omni-Man met others like Cecil Stedman and Art Rosenbaum, who would consider him a friend. Nolan was summoned by War Woman for reserved help and arrived to a secret facility and saved the Guardians from a collapsing ceiling with a new outfit, and also defeated the Lizard League. Some years later, he returned home from an unknown mission and encountered Debbie and Mark, who was dressed up in duct tape, calling himself Duct Tape Man, an alternate hero persona he considered using if he wouldn't get his Viltrumite powers. Nolan believed it was merely going to put him in harm's way. Debbie then decided that it would be best to just be normal and took him to the bathroom to remove his duct tape. Debbie decided they would love Mark even without his powers. As she leaves, however, Nolan becomes enraged, but then he has a second thought and is horrified and remained frozen at his brief feelings. At a baseball game, a young Mark gets ready to hit the ball as Nolan angrily watches from afar. Debbie walks up to him and asks what was wrong. Nolan said that if he had to watch it, he would rather do it from the sky, but Debbie told him to sit down with everyone else and not be a weirdo. Nolan mentions that the game was a waste of everybody's time since he could be doing a lot of other things. Mark gets ready to hit the ball, and Debbie tells Nolan to appreciate Mark as the young kid he was. She tells him that children bring back good memories and could remind them of what life was all about, and this makes Nolan smile. As a result, he changes his tune to cheer on his son and is pleased when Mark's team wins the game. Mark walks up to his parents, excitedly asking them if they had seen what he had done, and his father confirmed what he saw and expresses pride in him. Over time, his time on Earth made him happy, but he remained loyal to Viltrum, helping Mark develop and control his Viltrumite abilities. From underground, the criminals known as the Mauler twins rise and attack the White House. Some heroes, including Darkwing and War Woman, help civilians escape. When it appeared Darkwing would be crushed by a tank, Omni-Man lifted it and helped them get out. The Mauler twins kept on fighting the heroes, while the heroes attempted to help civilians escape. The twins were swiftly defeated once they had no more civilians to distract the heroes with. Later, Nolan makes it home and kisses his wife, who tells him that they should get him out of that suit. Mark complains that his parents should not talk about sex in front of him, but his mother tells him that she should be happy to hear them express their love. They mention that they'll be going to Berlin, which makes Mark jealous. However, Nolan tells him that he could go himself once his powers kick in. Mark leaves for school and looks at his father fly away with his mother. He tries flying himself, but does not manage to do it and instead gets embarrassed when he finds out somebody was watching him jump up and down. When Mark gets home, Debbie tells him that she heated up German bratwurst for him. He tells her that he had an interesting day. Nolan gets home and tells them that he'd been fighting a dragon in Hong Kong and gets ready to listen to Mark's day. Mark told him that he'd been getting his powers, but his father does not react until Debbie kicks him. Nolan congratulates him and tells him that they'd train the next day. Mark wakes up at 6, very tired, and his father tells him that they're gonna train. Once they're in the sky, Nolan says that he'll get the hang of flying, but he has to focus at first. His father tells him that flying could tire him and that you should use momentum in order to relax from time to time. He told his son to relax and realized Mark had practiced the night before. He tells him to land, but Mark had a hard time doing so and eventually crashed. Nolan told him to hit him and to use his whole body while doing it, even practicing while flying. Nolan showed Mark how to punch, hurting Mark, and Nolan said that this was part of the preparation. At home, Debbie reads and sees Mark go to his room. She asks if maybe he had pushed him too hard, which makes Nolan very mad. Debbie asks him what's gotten into him and he admits he does not know, but he thinks that maybe their lives might have been better if Mark had not gotten powers. Mark realized he needed something to punch in order to blow off steam and hears gunfire. 3 criminals run from the police after robbing a place. Mark fights a big criminal and manages to hurt him, but Omni-Man shows up and tells him he looks ridiculous, also mentioning that he skipped a few steps since he had caused a lot of destruction. Mark asks his father to hit him since he was not ready before, but his father told him he would not do it. Mark grew desperate and told his father he knew that he did not believe in him, but he wanted to prove he was strong enough and wanted to be like him. Nolan then hugs his son and tells him that he would be and tells him to follow him. They fly to a tailor where he tells Mark that he would take him shopping for a suit. The Guardians of the Globe meet, but realize that none of them called one another. Red Rush sees Omni-Man fly towards the Immortal in order to punch him and manages to push him out of the way. The heroes are in shock and they all attack Omni-Man at the same time. As Red Rush attacked him, he managed to grab hold of him and squeezed his head while receiving punches from the speedster until he crushed his skull. Martian Man wraps himself around Omni-Man, and then the Immortal asks him why he had killed Red Rush. Omni-Man receives some hits, which makes him stagger, but he kills Darkwing while slamming him into the ground, followed by Green Ghost, who had caught Darkwing's body. Aquarius attacks Omni-Man, and the Immortal says that there must be someone controlling him. However, they agree that they need to kill him so he doesn't kill them. Omni-Man managed to kill Aquarius, which angered Martian Man, who held on to Omni-Man so his colleagues could hit him. Omni-Man managed to get Martian Man off of him and deeply injured the Immortal, subsequently killing War Woman. The Immortal asked him why he had done it, but Omni-Man did not answer and then decapitated him, groaning from his wounds after doing so. After killing the Guardians of the Globe. The Guardians are dead and Omni-Man lays next to them, injured as well. A door opens and invisible agents look at the scene, followed by paramedics who are shocked and disgusted. They find Omni-Man is alive and they move the bodies out of the room. Cecil Stedman mentions that he had never seen anything like it and bangs his fist against a table. Omni-Man is brought to a hospital room where he is in a coma. They make it to Nolan's room where they see Nolan laying without responding. Cecil introduces himself and tells them that they have no idea who did it. Debbie tells him that he has some nerve, but he tells them that the Guardians have been murdered and that they were unable to bring them back, with Nolan being the only survivor. Cecil tells them that the news would eventually spread and he wanted them to know first. Debbie asks for materials and refuses to leave Nolan, mentioning that she had patched him up for 20 years. When Nolan awoke, he told Mark that Debbie had told him that he was keeping the planet safe and wanted to hear everything. Mark went to Maya's room but found out she had died, which Nolan described as part of the job. Mark left and Nolan demanded that they give him his suit back. Later, news broke that the Guardians had been missing for a week. At training, Mark tried attacking his father, who at first was able to dodge his punch. However, when Mark landed one, he told him that he needed to be able to take one as well and was about to punch him when Debbie interrupted. Cecil visited them and told them that they had seen somebody from Mars approaching Earth and needed to deal with him. Debbie refused and Mark offered to do it. Nolan told him to knock some sense into the guy and send him back where he came from. Nolan tells Cecil what he remembered from the night the Guardians were killed. He tells him that he had gotten a distress call from the Guardians, but everything seemed fine when he got there. However, the lights had gone out and he fought against the enemy until he passed out. Cecil's not convinced and says that he'd never seen Nolan lose like that, but believed that somebody was acting clever. The Flaction army invades the city once again, and Robot tells Teen Team that the Flactions were now immune to the time stream, and they should consider the city lost. He tells them that he will contact Cecil and request a nuclear response, but everyone disagrees. Invincible starts fighting the army, but is swiftly brought down and punched repeatedly in the face by the leader. Omni-Man arrives and starts defending the city, resisting all the attacks thrown at him and sending the enemies back where they had come from. However, when the leader looked up at Omni-Man once more, he punched him and went into the portal with him. Mark was worried, but inadvertently revealed Omni-Man was his father to his teammates. When Mark got home, Debbie tells Mark that his father dimension hops a lot and Nolan will be home soon. Omni-Man told the Flactions that they did not seem to understand that Earth was not theirs to conquer, taking them out and destroying their cities. Days later, Nolan arrived home and he had grown a full beard. He was hugged by Mark and Debbie, but they were repulsed by his smell and told him he needed a shower. Just then, a news report came out revealing that the Guardians were confirmed dead. People gather at the Guardians of the Globe's funeral and Omni-Man prepares to give a full speech. He mentions that he had fought the unimaginable, but always knew he was not alone. Nolan tells the people gathered that the people who had died were his friends and mentors. He mentions that at least the fallen heroes could rest together, and Olga was upset that she could not see her late husband. When she threw herself at the ground, Debbie rushed to help her. Omni-Man spots Damian Darkblood, telling him that the ceremony was private. He complains that he never gets invited, but reminded him that he always showed up anyway, adding that he wanted to discover clues and catch the killer. But Omni-Man told him not to pretend to do it because he cared, knowing he only did not want to go home, and told him that he already told Cecil everything he knew. Darkblood repeats that he knew Omni-Man had seen and heard nothing, having been left for dead. Omni-Man asked if he was insinuating something, but Darkblood said that he simply did not understand how to communicate like humans. The Graysons make it back to their house. Nolan asks if they want pizza, saying he could go to Naples and be back before the cheese stops bubbling, but Debbie asks him to let the delivery man take care of it. As Nolan tried watching television, all he saw was the speech he gave at the funeral while he changed the channels. Debbie asks Mark if he wanted to call William, but Mark gets angry, asking sarcastically if she wanted him to buy comic books. However, his father told him that whatever had happened, he could not bring it home, stopping Mark on the way to his room. Mark asked him if he could go, and Nolan let him, telling him that they would train together the following day. Debbie found it weird that he had just come home from his friend's funeral and was talking about pizza, and telling his son not to feel anything. However, Nolan told her that they were co-workers and that was the life they lived. He told her not to worry and added that he and Mark could do more outside than sulking there. Across the street, Donald runs a team of people who hear everything that is being said inside the household. Later, when Mark gets home, he runs into Nolan, who tells him to slow down. Mark explained that he had left Amber in his room while he dealt with the crisis. Nolan congratulated him, saying that that was the hard part of the job, but reminded him that he should change. As Debbie cooked dinner, Nolan threw a piece of the monster, asking if she wanted calamari. She tells him to get it off the counter while laughing and asks if he had called Cecil about putting some protection on the house, but he tells her he had just been busy and would do it later. He told her that he was a badass since he had defeated a kaiju, and she told him that she was one as well since she had sold a house that had a double homicide. Debbie sits down while working in the kitchen and she gets cold. Her computer turns off and she faces Damien, who's apologizing. She asks him what he's doing and he explains that he was looking for clues since the massacre didn't make sense to him. He points out that there had been 7 dead and only 1 alive, her husband, so he wanted her to help him since his answers had been unsatisfactory. She asks Darkblood why he cared, and he explains that he had escaped from hell and now sought justice for others so he could save his soul. He asks if her husband had not told her anything to soothe her fears, but she mentions that he had not, leaving once Nolan turned on the light. After asking her if she was alright, he felt the cold and knew Darkblood had been there, which he did not like, starting to cause suspicion. Omni-Man points out to Invincible that he is messing up the desert since he was flying too low. When the latter turns around, he finds he has created a big cloud of sand. Omni-Man tells him to build up speed and endurance by pushing himself, telling Invincible that being a Viltrumite was not easy. Omni-Man did a spin and Invincible tried to follow but lost control, so his father proposed going to Mount Everest, with the last one to reach it washing dishes for a week. Omni-Man reached Mount Everest first and told his son to take deep breaths since the air was thin. A hiker reached the summit and was surprised to see both of them there, but going down soon after. Omni-Man tells Invincible that sometimes he forgets how beautiful the planet can be, and told him that Viltrum was very different, having ended wars all over the universe, brought peace to thousands of galaxies, and lifted alien races out of the mud. Invincible told him that he could not believe he had left everything behind to go to a planet he had never seen before, and his father told him that when his grandparents died, he had felt lost for a long time, and saw going to Earth as a chance to build something new. He told him that Debbie changed Earth from a job to a home, but Invincible told him that he did not know if he could leave everything behind, and Omni-Man replies saying that being like them took sacrifice. He proceeded to tell his son that the last one home would take out the garbage for a month, but Invincible took off before he could finish and got a head start. Nevertheless, his father quickly passed him. Debbie makes it home, grabs a bottle of wine, and starts working. She enters private browsing mode and looks up Damien Darkblood, who is described as a freak who could not even save his own soul, but turns out he was a good detective. She hears Nolan and Mark making it back home. Once they enter the house, Nolan tells Debbie that after trying to get their son to break the sound barrier, Mark had finally done it by getting ready for a date, which Debbie did not know about, but Mark did not consider it a date and did not even plan it. Nolan asks Debbie if she wants to go out as well, but she tells him that she wants to sell Olga's house, mentioning the conspiracy behind the murders. Nolan tells her that Olga needs to quit drinking, which Debbie does not like and makes her suspicious. Darkblood pours himself a drink and receives Nolan, telling him that he wondered if he would come. Nolan tells him that he had been in his house and frightened his wife. Darkblood mentions that he had murdered 7 people, but Nolan tells him that perhaps it had been him, going to his house in order to finish the job he started, being a demon. Darkblood tells him that demons know evil when they see it, but Nolan ignores this and tells him that if he goes back in his house, he would not have to do anything since people would believe him over the demon. Darkblood tells him that he would not give up since the truth could not be hidden and his wife already suspected, wondering how long until his son did as well. Debbie works when Nolan approaches her, asking if she wanted to go to bed, but when she refused, he asks what was going on, and she tells him nothing. He tells her that being a wife of the most powerful man on Earth meant that she should not have to deal with work, but she tells him that she was not just his wife and she liked working. He tells her to be quiet, and at first she gets angry, but quiets down when she looks at his face. Nolan swiftly turns and grabs Cecil by the neck, throwing him against a bookshelf, but lets him go. Cecil apologizes and tells him that he meant to teleport to his front door, but he had run into a problem. Nolan tells him that he had almost killed him, being jumpy for reasons Cecil would understand. When Mark volunteers to go on a mission to Mars, saying that the same has happened before, Nolan tells him that that was the moon, which hardly counts as space. He added that his responsibilities were bigger than 4 astronauts. Cecil says that if Mark wanted to go, he would be doing them a great favor, so Nolan asks Debbie for support. She says that she does not like Mark missing school, but it would be for a good cause. Mark says that he could go to Mars and be back in a second, but Nolan mentions that the fact Mark does not know how far Mars is was exactly why he should go to school. Cecil tells Mark that it was a 2-week mission, and Mark agrees with his father, saying that he was not ready and had things going well with Amber. Debbie tells Mark that many people would tell him how to use his powers, but it would be up to him to make those decisions. After that, Mark decides to go, so Cecil tells him to pack a lunch since he'd be leaving the next day. Nolan and Debbie watched the news, and Mark told her that the mission was a waste of Mark's time, but Debbie mentioned that she was proud. Nolan told her that Mark did not understand his responsibilities, but Debbie reminds him that he was 17, also telling him that he'd been different ever since their son had gotten his powers. Nolan says that he's trying to teach him, but Debbie points out that he'd been distant, annoyed at everything, and mean. She also adds that he had been talking about Viltrum, so Nolan told her that he just wanted his son to know about his people, but she told him that she didn't know about them, only hearing stories. She told him that he'd been hiding something from her and she did not like it. Nolan tells her that he never thought he would have a family, but he met her, who he loved. But when he saw Mark with his powers and after what happened to the Guardians, he did not want to lose everything. He told her that Mark would be gone for 2 weeks and asks her if she remembers their first trip. Nolan and Debbie walk through Rome until they arrive at a fancy restaurant, which Nolan has made reservations for, which Debbie mentions is new. Nolan and Debbie reminisce about their past, remembering how Debbie had dumped him after their first date because she considered him to be a dick. Nolan told her that he had taken her to Rome, but she reminded him that he expected her to worship him for it, so he told her that he had been new to Earth and gotten better. Debbie tells him that he had only got a second date due to him saving kids, and was happy they were there. However, Nolan sensed that she still felt something was wrong, and she admitted like she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. Nolan tells her that he had not been honest with her about the murders, mentioning that Cecil believed he had something to do with the murders since he was not human, was the only survivor, and had never been liked by Cecil. Debbie tells him that he needed to talk to him, and Nolan tells her that he tried, but needed her to trust him. A dragon shows up, but Nolan does not move, simply asking Debbie if she trusted him. She tells him she does and begs him to do something about the dragon, to which he simply responds that he was on vacation, so Cecil should handle it. The news talked about the success of the astronauts on Mars, and Mark arrives home, hearing noises in the house, but when he opens the door, he sees his parents awkwardly staring at him. Debbie asks him how Mars was, and Mark tells him that it was less eventful than whatever had been going on in the house while he was gone. Later, Debbie tells Nolan that if she sells 2 more houses, she would break the monthly record. Nolan told her that she could do it, and he tells her that new evidence had also come up, and so Cecil had apologized, which he never did. Invincible and Omni-Man fought a villain who they wanted to talk. Omni-Man taught him how to scare villains and dropped him, catching him later. Later, Mark attempts to stop an asteroid heading for Earth, and he does so successfully, knocking it back into space. After a huge effort, Omni-Man tells him that the asteroid was small, which shocked him. Mark gets a text from Amber and is allowed to leave. He calls Mark later to tell him to fight Elephant. At dinner, Mark tells his parents that he can help Titan take down Machine Head, but Debbie was not listening. After Mark's explanation, Nolan tells him that he would be making a huge mistake because he was being used and that problem was beneath him. Debbie tells Mark that sometimes people are not who they appear to be and adds that helping someone was never beneath him. Debbie asks Nolan why he would tell Mark that saving lives was beneath him, and he responds that Mark did things on a bigger scale and she did not understand that. She reminds him that when he had first arrived on Earth, he knew nothing about humans, and she had taught him how to be a superhero for Earth. Nolan tells her that he believed Mark was trusting someone he should not, instead of listening to them. They agree that they wanted Mark to make good choices. Debbie calls Nolan, asking him to get food from Rome and wine from Provence. When Nolan leaves, she checks the house and finds the air vent had been moved. She also finds a bag, but hides it as Nolan comes back later. Later, Invincible and Titan fight the supervillains but are overwhelmed as Omni-Man watches from a distance. Invincible is electrocuted while Titan is burned. After a sudden burst of energy, Invincible tells them that they would die and swiftly kills the two before having his head shoved into the ground by Battle Beast. Invincible has a hole all the way through him, so doctors work on him as Debbie and Nolan make it to the ER. Mark finally woke and saw his parents. Nolan tells him he knew he would pull through and tells him he was out 6 days, which shocks Mark. Eve tells him that she covered for him with Amber, telling her he had got hit by a bus, and mentions Monster Girl and Black Samson being still unconscious. Nolan asks Cecil if Darkblood had cracked yet, but Cecil tells him that Darkblood is stubborn. When asked if Darkblood had murdered the Guardians, Cecil said that they do not know, but he wondered why he would even do it in the first place. Omni-Man tells him that Darkblood is a demon. Cecil asks if Mark had not told him that he'd be taking on Machine Head by himself, and is surprised to see that Mark does not listen to Nolan, which is normal for teenagers from Earth. Nolan asks Debbie if she'd be going out, and she tells him that she needed to pick up some dry cleaning and something for dinner. Nolan offers to come along, but she tells him that he needs to work on his book and then leaves. While she's gone, Nolan opens up his bag and finds his suit was gone. Later, since he found out that Debbie had been seeing Art, he angrily approaches him from behind, but shows him a few beers he bought. Nolan and Art share laughs while reminiscing about the past. However, he asks Art why he's a little nervous. Art tells him that he's tired, and Nolan says he understands since he knew how things could change from one day to another, handing Art another beer. Nolan makes it home where Debbie drinks wine. She asks him why he killed the Guardians, but he denied it. She throws her bottle of wine at him when he tells her that she's drunk, but he catches it and she angrily tells him to go fuck himself before going upstairs. He breaks the bottle of wine and punches a hole through the wall. Exposed. Debbie wakes up and goes downstairs where she sees Nolan. She asks him why he had kept his suit, and he tells her that he used it to take care of Damien Darkblood, but suggests that maybe he wanted her to find it and tells her that he wanted to tell her months ago since he was not blackmailed. He asks her to trust him, but she says it's impossible to since the Guardians were their friends. Nolan says he did not have a choice, so she tells him to get out of her house. He storms out and tells her they would talk later. Debbie calls Mark, but he does not pick up. Soon she's surrounded and Donald tells her to go with him. Omni-Man practices how to tell Mark that he killed the Guardians, saying that it was his responsibility, confident Mark would understand. He says that he would say something that would change everything. Nolan looks for Mark at home, but finds nothing except the GDA agent, who he grabs and slams into the ground. He's shot at by many of the agents, who he kills swiftly. He finds the house the GDA had brought in front of them, which infuriates him, but Donald tells him it was for his family's protection. Nolan tells him he's always been pathetic and crushes his spine. Donald tells Cecil that it's been an honor and blows the house up. William drives home when he's approached by an angered Omni-Man. William asks if he was okay, but Nolan simply asks where Mark was since William was supposed to drop him off an hour ago. He tells Nolan that Mark has gone with Eve. Nolan puts a dent in William's car, which scares him, and asks where Eve is. William tells him where and Nolan flies off. Nolan flies but is struck down by an enormous beam of light coming from a satellite in space, which manages to bring him down and many animals around him. However, he soon gets up once again, resisting the beam's energy and destroying the satellite. Cecil comments that $400 billion had just been used on a nosebleed. Omni-Man went back to going after Mark and Eve while Cecil told them he would use his teleporter. Nolan is shot at by Cecil. He tries to grab him but disappears just before Nolan grabs him. Nolan tells him to keep out of it, but Cecil says he could not do that, asking why he had killed the Guardians. He tells him that he never needed their help since they were weak. But Cecil points out that they had been his friends and suggests that there had to be a reason. He tells her that Debbie deserved an answer and tells Nolan that he had fooled her and all of them during these 20 years. He asks Nolan if Mark knows, which worries him, but Nolan realizes Cecil's just wasting time. When Cecil leaves, Nolan is attacked by Sinclair's cyborgs, which put up a fight as he tries to get them off. He fights the monsters and rips them apart. Cecil, D.A. Sinclair, and Debbie watch Nolan's fight in horror as he starts ripping the bodies apart. Agents also tell Cecil that Eve and Mark were working towards Nolan's location, which worries Cecil. When Nolan defeats the fallen soldiers, he places the camera inside their guts, which makes the people at the GDA retch in disgust and makes Sinclair angry. Nolan faces another monster on his way to Mark, which he tells Cecil he had defeated already. Cecil, however, told him the monster now felt no pain and was juiced up with every drug, enhancement, and upgrade available. 2 news helicopters went to Omni-Man's fight. Nolan fights the monsters while Debbie tells Cecil to call Eve's phone since she was with Mark again. As Nolan was about to be eaten, Mark punches the creature and sends it flying. Eve gets called by Debbie and asks what was happening. Nolan awoke and Mark happily told him it was about time they teamed up together. When the creature rose, Cecil tells Eve not to help them and to get to Guardians HQ. Mark and Nolan had a hard time with the creature. Debbie tells him to call it off, but Cecil says he cannot do that since Mark could be allied with his father. After that, Debbie mentions that that was why she always hated him, which Cecil sympathizes with. Cecil is told that a new object was approaching Omni-Man's location, turning out to be the Immortal, who immediately starts hitting him furiously. Omni-Man catches one of his punches and mentions that he should have stayed dead, sending him back. However, Nolan worries over Mark, who's under the beast's control. Mark grabs a cable and electrocutes the beast as Nolan and Immortal keep fighting. Nolan caught one of his punches and stabbed his fist into his stomach, punching all the way through him and shocking the entire world, who was watching thanks to the news helicopters. However, Immortal grabs his thumbs and sticks them into Omni-Man's eyes, so he grabs his hand and splits his body in half as Mark watches. Nolan approaches his son and tells him they need to talk. The Immortal falls dead to the ground as Nolan tells Mark they need to go. Mark, however, understands that he had killed the Guardians and begins punching his father, saying that someone was controlling him, but Nolan throws him away and tells him that he was fine, adding that it was time he revealed where he really came from. He explains that he's from Viltrum, which was perfect, but had taken them a lot of strength, determination, and courage to get there. In order to reach their full potential, they removed the weak from their society until it was unstoppable. When Nolan was born, Viltrum was already the greatest empire in the galaxy, deciding to make it the only empire in the galaxy. When Nolan was old enough, he joined the war effort until forces were stretched thin and the expansion stopped, each officer given a planet to weaken by themselves. Nolan went to Earth, and it was now time for Mark and himself to get Earth ready to join the Viltrum Empire. Mark cries, but Nolan reassures him that this was for the greater good, not being able to know the truth until he had his powers. He explains that he had to be sure that Mark was a Viltrumite first, so Mark pushes him away and asks if he was not a Viltrumite, would he be another human to conquer, which does not make sense to him because he knew Mark loves both him and his mother. Nolan simply asks if he had any idea how long they lived, since the older they got, the slower they aged. He tells Mark that he would live for thousands of years since Viltrumite DNA was so pure, and he was nearly pure Viltrumite. He adds that everybody he knows and loves would be gone before he even looked 30, and so he tells Mark that Earth was not his world, but he could help out by ending hunger, stopping wars, and giving them medical technology. When Mark asks, he lets Mark know that he does love his mother, but she was more like a pet to him, which angers Mark, asking Nolan if he really believes he would enslave his friends to aliens he had never met, adding that he did not give a shit about Viltrum. He tells Nolan that he would not let him destroy his home, and Nolan tells him that he did not know what he was saying and would not let him interfere. Nolan understands and punches Mark into the ground and asks him if he really believed he could stop him. Mark punches him, but Nolan catches it and does not move, crushing his hand and throwing him away. Mark tells his father not to hit him anymore since it was not too late, but Nolan tells him it was as jets reach their location. Nolan tells Mark to look at all humans needed in order to imitate their power, saying that it was right to pity them, wrong to value them over Viltrumites. He throws Mark away and is shot at by the jets, which do not move him. He destroys a jet, so Mark flies in order to help the pilot out and save him. The pilot thanks Mark, but Nolan asks him why he had done so and kills him immediately, going for the next one, but Mark stops him. Nolan asks if it really made a difference that he had killed him since he would have only lived another 50 years, but Mark tells him he could have had a life. Nolan asks if that had hurt him and punches him away all the way over to a big city where he caused a lot of destruction with the fall. As a building falls, Mark pushes it, so it does not, but he cannot stand the weight and it crushes everyone inside. He starts crying and asks Nolan how he could have done such a thing, and he tells him that his stubbornness to stop the inevitable had killed them. He asks Mark how many people needed to die, and tells him that he knew he was right. Mark asks him if his mother's life was meaningless, and Nolan said that in the grand scheme of things it was, which makes Debbie cry. Mark asks him how he could say such a thing and punches Nolan, who's angered because for the first time in his life he was telling Mark the truth. He punches Mark underground to a train station and holds him in front of one of the moving trains. The train hits Mark, who does not move along with his father and is hit by the blood, bones, and guts of the passengers inside. Nolan tells Mark that humans were meaningless and cavemen without them, but Mark tells him that he had seen him save people before, nearly dying in the process, suggesting that perhaps Nolan had been a Viltrumite when he came to Earth but had changed. However, Nolan tells Mark that even if he had been happy for a time, he was loyal to Viltrum. Mark punches his father once again, who dodges it and is angered, slamming his son into the ground and bringing him to space. He tells Mark that his time on Earth had been a speck in the span of his life, and he did not know who he really was. He tells Mark that he would burn the planet down before he spent another minute living among animals. Mark punches him in the face, but he does not even move, returning the punch and sending Mark flying repeatedly. Nolan takes Mark deep underwater, where he stops moving and then throws him into a mountain. He punches Mark once more with a punch so strong it cracks the mountain, which causes an avalanche and covers Mark and a town down below. He picks Mark up and asks him if he had had enough, but Mark once again tells him that he would stop him. So Nolan tells him that he was ready for that to happen whenever Mark was. Nolan tells him that his intentions were wasted since making Earth a part of the Empire would make Earth better than it ever was. Mark asks what would happen if they resisted and is told that they were there to keep them from resisting. Nolan asks if he really wanted to die for the planet and accepts that he could always start again with another kid. He punches Mark repeatedly until he loses consciousness. Nolan cannot punch Mark in order to kill him and lays him down next to him as his son gasps weakly. He asks Mark why he made him do what he had done since he was only fighting so he could watch everyone around him die. He asks Mark what he would have after 500 years, and Mark tells him he would have him. Silenced by the admission, Nolan looks at his hands, thinking about what he's done and wondering if it really was the right thing to do. When Mark says "Dad," he realizes he still loves Mark as well as Earth and flies away, crying as he breaks through the atmosphere, making his way out of the solar system. Exile. Moments after leaving Earth, Nolan voyaged toward countless stars, moons, and grew a beard. For months, he seemingly embarked on a soul search until he found a black hole of some sort. He, perhaps out of spite or was pulled, began to slowly plunge himself into it until he saw a spacecraft full of passengers nearly caught in the black hole. Omni-Man decides to save them, where he saved and took the passengers back to their world, was quickly given amnesty, and became their monarch. He also became close with one of the passengers, and the two became married, and eventually another child was born. Reunion between father and son. Nuozalot, a resident of Thraxia, was sent by their monarch to Earth with the purpose of locating Invincible. Nuozalot informs the heroes of meteor showers that could destroy the planet. Invincible arrives to Thraxia with Nuozalot and meets the planet's monarch, which turned out to be his father, Omni-Man himself. Seeing his son, Nolan happily greeted him while the latter was shocked by the reunion. Invincible was frozen for moments, but then made a fist, and so did Nolan, but instead a hug was formed. Shocking Nolan, the two would trade barbs, with Mark leaving Thraxia, but Nolan chased after him, and he was given a few minutes to explain his purpose, showing him his new wife, Andressa, and his child, his younger half-brother. Once more, the two argued. Nolan admits he's now a fugitive of Viltrum because he left Earth, and now they believe they know of his current whereabouts, and they could kill his younger brother. He also admits that he cannot return to Earth. Nolan tells Mark he must help him defend Thraxia from Viltrumite threats. Quickly, the two fought against Lucan, Vidor, and Thula, two of which Nolan defeated and killed. Nolan stops Thula from killing Mark, but was apprehended by a surviving Lucan. And much later, Viltrumite grunts are seen transporting Nolan. In quite possibly his last moments with seeing or speaking to his son, he urges him not to forget the deeds and acts he did, and his books. He demands that Mark read his books. Later, Craig mentions to Mark that Nolan is being transported to an unknown location and prepped for his execution for failing his mission. And that was the life of Omni-Man, so far.
Did you enjoy our video? Well, then be sure to check out these other great videos from the Amagi, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.